It's called The Wild, Chapter 7, Part 2, The Sounding of the Call. We're at the bottom of page 76 in our PDF. He began to sleep out at night, staying away from the camp for days at a time, and once he crossed the divide at the head of the creek and went down into the land of timber and streams. There he wandered for a week, seeking vainly for fresh signs of the wild brother, killing his mate as he traveled, and traveling with a long, easy lope that seemed to never tire. He fished for salmon in a broad stream that emptied somewhere into the sea, and by the stream he killed a large black bear, blinded by mosquitoes when likewise fishing, raging through the forest, helpless and terrible. Even so, it was a hard fight, and it aroused the last latent remnants of Buck's ferocity. 2 days later, when he returned to his kill and found a dozen wolverines quarreling over the spoil, he scattered them like chaff, and those that fled left two behind that would quarrel no more. Blood longing became stronger than ever before. He was a killer, a thing that preyed, living on things that lived, unaided alone by virtue of his own strength and prowess, surviving triumphantly in a hostile environment where only the strong survive. Because of all this, he became possessed of a great pride in himself, which communicated itself like a contagion to his physical being. It advertised itself in all his movements, was apparent in every play of muscle, spoke plainly as if speech in the way he carried himself, and made his glorious furry coat, if anything, more glorious. For the stray brown on his muzzle and above his chest, and the splash of white hair that ran down his chest, he might have been mistaken for a gigantic wolf, larger than the rest of the breed. But his St. Bernard father he had inherited size and weight, but his shepherd mother had given shape to the size and weight. His muzzle was a long wolf muzzle, save that it was larger than the muzzle of any wolf, and his head was somewhat broader, was a wolf head on a massive scale. His cunning was wolf cunning and wild cunning, his intelligence, shepherd intelligence, and St. Bernard intelligence, and all this, plus an experience gained in the fiercest of schools, made him as formidable a creature as any that roamed the wild. Carnivorous animal, living on straight meat diet, he was in full flower, at the high tide of his life, overspilling with vigor and virility. When Thornton passed a caressing hand along his back, a snapping and crackling followed that hand, each hair discharging its pent magnetism at the contact. Every part, brain and body, nerve tissue and fiber, was keyed to the most exquisite pitch, and between all the parts there was a perfect equilibrium of adjustment. To sights and sounds and events which required action he responded with lightning-like rapidity. Quickly as a husky dog could leap to defend from attack or to attack, he could leap twice as quick. He saw a movement or heard a sound and responded in less time than any dog required to compass the mere seeing or hearing. He perceived and determined and responded in the same instant. Point of fact, 3 actions of perceiving, determining, and responding were sequential, but so infinitesimal were the intervals of time between them that they appeared simultaneous. His muscles were supercharged with vitality, and they snapped into place sharply like steel springs. Life streamed through him in splendid flood, glad and rampant, till it seemed that it would burst him asunder in sheer ecstasy and pour forth generously over the world. "Never was there such a dog," said John Thornton one day, as the partners watched Buck marching out of camp. "When he was made, the mold was broke," said Pete. "By jingo, I think so myself," Hans affirmed. They saw him marching out of camp, but they didn't see the instant and terrible transformation which took place as soon as he was in the secrecy of the forest. He no longer marched. At once he became a thing of the wild, stealing along softly, cat-footed, a passing shadow that appeared and disappeared among the shadows. He knew how to take advantage of every cover, to crawl on his belly like a snake, and like a snake to leap and strike. He could take a pargaton from his nest, kill a rabbit as it slept, and snap in midair little chipmunks fleeing a second too late for the trees. Fish in open pools were not too quick for him, nor was a beaver mending their dams too wary. He killed to eat, not from wantonness, but he preferred to eat what he killed himself. So a lurking humor ran through his deed, which was a delight to steal upon the squirrels. We had all but beat them, let them go, chattering in mortal fear to the treetops. Fall of the year, a moose appeared in greater abundance, moving slowly from the winter into the lower, less rigorous valleys. Buck had already dragged down a stray, part-grown calf, but he wished for stronger, large, more formidable quarry, and he came upon it one day at the divide of a head of a creek. A band of 20 moose had crossed over from the land of streams and timber. Chief among them was a great bull, with a savage temper, standing over 6 feet from the ground, as formidable as an antagonist as even Buck could desire. Back and forth the bull tossed his great palm-ended antlers, branching to 14 points, embracing 7 feet with tips. His small eyes burned with a vicious, bitter light, and he roared with fury at the sight of Buck. From the bull's side, just forward the flank, protruded a feathered arrow end, which accounted for his savageness. Guided by instinct from the hunting days of the primordial world, Buck proceeded to cut the bull out from the herd. It wasn't a slight task. He would bark and dance in front of the bull, just out of reach of the great antlers of the terrible splay hoofs, which would stamp his life out in a single blow. Unable to turn his back on the fanged danger and go on, the bull would be driven into paroxysms of rage. At such moments he charged Buck, who retreated craftily, luring on by a simulated inability to escape. But when he was thus separated from his fellows, 2 or 3 younger bulls would charge back upon Buck, and enable the wounded bull to join the herd. There's a patience in the wild, dog, tireless, persistent as life itself, that holds motionless for endless hours, a spider in its web, a snake in its coils, panther in its ambuscade. Patience belongs peculiarly to life when it's hunting its living food, and it belonged to Buck as he clung to the flank of the herd, retarding its march, and irritating the young bulls, worrying the cows for their half-grown calves, and driving the wounded bull mad with helpless rage. For half a day this continued. Buck multiplied himself, attacking from all sides, enveloping the herd in a whirlwind of menace, cutting out his victim as fast as he could rejoin its mates, wearing out the patience of creatures preyed upon and a lesser patience of the creatures preying. As the day wore along and the sun dropped to its bed in the northwest, the darkness had come back and the fall nights were 6 hours long. The young bulls retreated their steps more and more reluctantly to the aid of their beset leader. The downcoming winter was hurrying upon them to the lower levels, and it seemed they could never shake this tireless creature that held them back. Besides, it wasn't the life of a herd or a young bull that was threatened. Life of only one member was demanded, which was a remoter interest than their own lives. In the end, they were content to pay that toll. As twilight fell, the old bull stood with lowered head, watching his mates, the cows he had known, the calves he had fathered, the bulls he had mastered, as they shambled on at a rapid pace through the fading light. He couldn't follow, for his nose leaped the merciless fanged terror that wouldn't let him go. 300 more weight and half a ton he weighed. He lived a long, strong life, full of fight and struggle, and at the end he faced death at the teeth of a creature whose head didn't reach past his knuckled knees. From then on, day and night, Buck never left his prey, never gave it a moment's rest, never permitted it to browse the leaves or trees or shoots of a young birch and willow, nor did he give the wounded bull opportunity to shake his burning thirst in the trickling streams they crossed. Often in desperation, he burst into long stretches of flight. Such times Buck didn't attempt to stay him, but loped easily at his heels, satisfied with the way the game was played, laying down when the moose stood still, attacking him fiercely when he went to eat or drink. The great head drooped more and more under its tree of horns, and the shambling trot grew weak and weaker. He took standing for long periods, with nose to ground, dejected ears drooping limply. Buck found more time to get water for himself and which to rest. At such moments, panting with a red, long tongue and eyes fixed upon that bull, it appeared to Buck that a change was coming over the face of things. He could feel a new stir in the land. As the moose was coming into the land, other kinds of life were coming in. Forest and stream and air seemed palpitant with their presence. The news of it was borne upon him not by sight or sound or smell, but by some other subtler sense. He heard nothing, saw nothing, yet knew that the land was somehow different. Through it, strange things were afoot and raging, and he resolved to investigate after he'd finished the business at hand. At last, at the end of the 4th day, he pulled the great moose down. For a day and night he remained by his kill, eating and sleeping, turning to turn about, then rested, refreshed and strong, and strode toward the camp and John Thornton. He broke into a long, easy lope and went on hour after hour, never at a loss for the tangled way, heading straight home through the strange country with a certain direction that put man and his magnetic needle to shame. As he became more and more conscious of the new stir in the land, there was a life abroad different from the life that had been there through the summer. No longer was this fact borne upon him in a subtle, mysterious way. The birds talked of it, the squirrels chattered upon it, the very breeze whispered of it. Several times he stopped and drew in a morning great sniff, reading the message that made him leap with greater speed. He was oppressed with a sense of calamity happening. If it were not calamity, it had already happened, and he crossed the last watershed and dropped down into the valley toward camp. He proceeded with great caution. 3 miles away he came upon a fresh trail that sent his neck hair rippling and bristling. It led straight toward camp and John Thornton. Buck hurried on, swiftly and stealthily, every nerve straining and tense, alert to the multitudinous details that told a story, all but the end. His nose gave a varying description of the passage of life on the heels of which he was traveling. He remarked the pregnant silence of the forest. Bird life had flitted, squirrels were hiding. He only saw a sleek gray fellow flattened against a gray dim limb. that seemed to be a woody excrescence of the wood itself. As Buck slid upon the obscureness of a gliding shadow, his nose was jerked to the side through a positive force had gripped and pulled. He followed the new scent into a thicket and found Nig lying on his side dead, where he had dragged himself, an arrow protruding, head and feathers from either side of his body. 100 yards further on, Buck came upon one of the sled dogs Thornton had bought in Dawson. This dog was thrashing about in a death struggle directly on the trail, and Buck passed around him without stopping. From the camp came the faint sound of many voices rising and falling in a sing-song chant. Bellowing forward to the edge of the clearing, he found Hans, lying on his face, feathered with arrows like a porcupine. Same instant, Buck peered out from where the spruce bough lodge had been, and saw what made his hair leap, stand straight on his neck and shoulders. A gust of overpowering rage swept over him. He didn't know that he had growled, but he growled with a terrible ferocity. For the last time in his life, he allowed passion, usurp cunning and reason, because of this great love for John Thornton, that he lost his head. The Yeehats were dancing about the wreckage of the spruce bough lodge when they heard a fearful roar and saw rushing upon them an animal the like of which they had never seen before. It was Buck, a live hurricane of fury, hurling himself toward them in a frenzy to destroy. He sprang at the foremost man, chief of the Yeehats, ripping his throat wide open till the rent jugular spouted a fountain of blood. He didn't pause to worry the next victim, but ripped in passing with the next bound, tearing wide the throat of a second man. There was no withstanding him. He plunged about in their very midst, tearing, rending, destroying, in constant terrific motion, which defied the arrows that were discharged at him. In fact, so inconceivably rapid were his movements, so close were the Indians tangled together, that they shot one another with an arrow. And the young hurtler, hurling a spear at Buck in mid-air, drove through the chest of another huntler with such force the point broke the skin of the back and stood out beyond. In a panic seized the Yeehats, and they fled into terror, proclaiming the advent of a truly evil spirit. Truly Buck was a fiend incarnate, raging at their heels and dragging them down like deer as they raced through the trees. It was a fateful day for the Yeehats. They scattered far and wide over the country. Not until a week later did the last of the survivors gather together in a lower valley in Calabasas. As for Buck, weary of the pursuit, he returned to the desolated camp. He found Pete where he'd been killed in his blankets in the first moment of surprise. Thornton's desperate struggle was fresh written on the earth, and Buck scented every detail of it down to the edge of a deep pool. By the edge, head and 4 feet in the water, Jay Skeet, faithful to the last. The pool itself, muddy and discolored from the sluice boxes, hid what it contained, and it contained John Thornton. Buck followed his trace into the water, and then no trace led away. All day long, Buck brooded by the pool and roamed restlessly about the camp. Death, as was a cessation of movement, passing out of away from the lives of the living, he knew John Thornton was dead. It left a great void in him, somewhat akin to hunger, but a void which ached, and which food couldn't fill. At times when he paused to contemplate the carcasses of the Yeehats, he forgot the pain of it, and many times he was aware of a pride in himself, a pride greater than any he'd yet experienced. He had killed man, the noblest game of all, and he had killed in the face of the law of club and fang. He sniffed the bodies curiously. They were no match at all. Were it not for their arrows, spears, and clubs, thenceforward he'd be unafraid of them, except when they bore in their hands arrows, spears, and clubs. Night came on, and a full moon rose half over the trees into the sky, lighting the land that lay bathed into ghostly day. With the coming of the night, brooding and mourning by the pool, Buck became alive to the stirring of a new life in the forest, other than that the Yeehats had made. He stood and listened and scented. From far away, drifting a faint, sharp yelp, followed by a chorus of similar yelps. As the moments passed, the yelps grew closer and louder, and Buck knew them as things heard in the other world which persisted in his memory. He walked to the center of an open space and listened. It was a call, the many-noted call, sounding more luring and compelling than ever before, and as never before he was ready to obey. John Thornton was dead. The last tie was broken. Man and the claims of man no longer bound him. Hunting their living meat as the Yeehats were hunting it on the flanks of the migrating moose, Wolfpack had at last crossed over the land of streams and timber and invaded Buck's Valley. In the clearing where the moonlight streamed, they poured into a silvery flood, and in the center of the clearing stood Buck, motionless as a statue, waiting their coming. They were awed, so still and large he stood. A moment's pause, and the boldest one leaped straight for him. Like a flash, Buck struck, breaking his neck. Then he stood without movement as before, and the stricken wolf rolling in agony behind him. 3 others tried in sharp succession, One after the other they drew back, streaming blood from slashed throats and shoulders. It was sufficient to fling the whole pack forward, pell-mell crowded together, blocked and confused by its eagerness to pull down the prey. Buck's marvelous quickness and agility stood him in good stead. Pivoting on his hind legs and snapping and gashing, he was everywhere at once, presenting a front which was apparently unbroken, so swift did he whirl and guard from side to side. But to prevent them from getting behind, he was forced back, down past the pool and into the creek bed, till he brought up against a high gravel bank. He worked along to a right angle in the bank, which the men had made the course of mining. In this angle he came to bay, protected on 3 sides, with nothing to do but face the front. So well did he face it that at the end of half an hour the wolves drew back discomfited. The tongues were all but out and lolling, and the white fangs showed cruelly white in the moonlight. Some were lying down with their heads raised and ears pricked forward. Others stood on the feet watching him, and others were lapping water from the pool. One wolf, long and lean and gray, advanced cautiously in a friendly manner, and Buck recognized that wild brother with whom he had run for a day and night. He whined softly, and Buck whined. They touched noses. Then an old wolf, gaunt and battle-scarred, came forward. Buck writhed his lips into a preliminary of a snarl, but sniffed noises with them. Whereupon the wolf sat down, pointed nose at the moon, and broke out a long wolf howl. The other sat down and howled. And now the call came to Buck in an unmistakable accent. He too sat down and howled. This over, he came out of his angle, and the pack crowded around him, sniffing in half-friendly, half-savage manner. The leaders lifted the yelp of the pack and sprang into the woods. The woods swung in behind, yelping in chorus, and Buck ran with them, side by side with the wild brother, yelping as he ran. And here may well end the story of Buck. The years were not many when the Yeehats noted a change in the breed of Timberwolves. Some were seen with splashes of brown on the head and muzzle, with a rift of white centering down the chest. But more remarkable than this, the Yeehats tell of a ghost dog that runs at the head of the pack. They are afraid of this ghost dog, for he has cunning greater than they, stealing from their traps in fierce winters, robbing their traps, slaying their dogs, and defying their bravest hunters. The tale grows worse. Hunters there who fail to return to the camp, and hunters there have been told their tribesmen found with throats slashed cruelly open and wolf prints about them in the snow, greater than the prints of any wolf. Each fall the Yeehats follow the movement of the moose. There's a certain valley they never enter, and women there become sad when the word goes over how the evil spirit came to select that valley for an abiding place. In the summers there's one visitor, however, to that valley, of which the Yeehats do not know. It's a great, glorious coated wolf, like and yet unlike all other wolves. He crosses alone from the smiling timberland and comes down into an open space among the trees. Here a yellow stream flows from rotted moose-hide sacks and sinks into the ground, with long grasses growing through it, and vegetable mold overrunning it, and hiding from its yellow from the sun, and he muses for a time, howling once, long and mournfully, ere he departs. But he's not always alone. When the long winter nights come, and the wolves follow their meat into the lower valleys, he may be seen running at the head of the pack through the pale moonlight, the glimmering borealis leaping gigantically above his fellows, his greatest throat a bellow as he sings the song of the younger world, which is the song of the pack.